Good morning, lovelies. Today we're going to talk about 5 ways that you can improve your writing. Because even if you think that you're an absolute master of the craft, you can always improve. Trust me and my ego found this out the hard way. These are all the ways that I personally use to continue to improve my craft, and I encourage all of you to give them a shot, as well as share any tips you have in the comments. Before we get started, remember to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, so you don't miss any more videos on writing advice, as well as videos on fantasy, science fiction, and horror through a feminist lens. Also, if you can, support this video on Patreon like these fine people are doing. The link is in the description. And if you've seen any of my other videos, you may have noticed that I have moved and also made a bookshelf that will hopefully not collapse and fall on me while I do this. That would be bad. But yeah, no, I have officially moved out of my parents' house back into my apartment, and it's been stressful. I actually forgot my camera and tried to do this on my phone, and it sucked. It was bad. So I'm redoing it with the proper camera this time. Let's hope it doesn't suck. Number 1. Understand that you are not the perfect writer and you never will be. There's this thing called student mentality, which is even if you are an undisputed master or expert in whatever field you're in, you can always learn, that you are always learning until the day you die. This applies to writing as well. It doesn't matter how long you've been writing or how many books you have published, you can always learn something new about the craft. Once upon a time, I thought that my stories were the best, that I was at the top of my game, and that I would be on the New York Times bestseller list within a year. Needless to say, that did not happen. I was told by some friends in the publishing industry in no uncertain terms that while I was a strong writer, I still had a lot of potential and therefore still had a lot to learn. This was before I even really knew what story structure was, so they were absolutely right. They then gave me a list of books on writing to help me out. Speaking of which, number 2, read books on writing. Maybe it's just the way that I personally absorb information, but every time that I read a book about writing, be it story structure, character arcs, or just simple grammar workbooks, there is a significant increase in the quality of my writing. Now, I have some faves that I would like to recommend to you guys, actually right here. Let's see what these stay. So the first one is the Complete Handbook of Novel Writing. And this is really interesting in that it's a collection of essays from authors all around the world. And they're subdivided into different categories. So if you're in the idea phase, or the outlining phase, or coming up with character backstory and arcs, or self-editing, or trying to get it published, they've got it all in here, and it's really cool. They don't really go in depth though, because this is supposed to be a book about everything, and so they're going for breadth rather than depth, but it's still really helpful and really cool to see like 12 different authors talk about their personal experience in a certain specific part of the writing process. Next, we have The Writer's Journey by Christopher Vogler. This book talks specifically about the hero's journey, one of the oldest and most recognizable versions of story structure. And he also goes into the most common archetypes in stories, so like the hero, the ally, the shapeshifter, the shadow, etc. He mostly talks about movies, but you can also apply that to your books. Save the Cat writes a novel. This is based on the screenwriting version of Save the Cat, and then this gal Jessica Brody changed that into novel writing format. And this is another way to structure your story, specifically with the 3-act story structure, and she divides them all into beats, the most important, impactful beats of a story that she argues every good story has, because they're like universal. And you could argue with her on that, but it is still a really great tool to use, especially if you're like me and you constantly get stuck in the outlining and story structure phase and you're like, how the hell do I fill all this blank space? I've plugged this book before, I'm going to plug it again. Beyond Kings and Princesses, Governments for World Builders. If you are working in any sort of science fiction, fantasy, anything that requires you to create another world that has any semblance of a government, you'll want this book. And finally, Putting the Science in Fiction. This was really cool. So basically, it's very similar to The Complete Guide of Novel Writing in that it's a collection of essays, but rather than writers, they grabbed a bunch of scientists, astrophysicists, biologists, genome engineering, genetics, from 0 to 60, legs that is, the brain, things to know for when Skynet takes over. Sometimes it really is rocket science, Star Wars in the far future. Like they basically took all of these scientists and had them talk about what stories get right and what they get wrong in science fiction. And I read this mostly for the entertainment value, but it is also very useful if you're writing any sort of science fiction or even contemporary fiction, because it's going to help you, not get it totally right, but get your science part more plausible. Number 3, read books, period. Continue to read and study other works of literature, especially in your genre, as this is going to help you stay up to date as to what's in fashion, what's going out of fashion, what do you readers expect, what do they not expect, what do they want, etc. Study why the characters are engaging, the structure of the story, the prose, the sentence structure, etc. I also do enjoy dipping into the classics from time to time. You can actually see them right here. Dracula, Frankenstein. I just finished Little Women. It's not on my shelf because I'm actively reading it, but The Count of Monte Cristo is on my desk. I habitually duck into that just to see why are we still talking about these stories from literally hundreds of years ago. It's usually because of the great characters and or universal themes. Also, this expand outside of your literary genre extends to different types of authors. So, if you're a man, pick up some books by women. If you're white, look for authors of color. If you're cishet, look for queer authors. Why? Well, different people view the world in different ways, and when they're authors, they provide different themes and types of characters in their stories that we're not used to seeing in the mainstream. So diversifying your bookshelf will expose you to that and make you a better writer. Number 4, watch YouTube videos on writing. It's free, and also YouTube is very good at staying up to date with current publishing trends. You know, the selling part of selling your novel. The advantage that the internet has over the paper word is that by the time a book on writing or publishing gets out, it's already out of date. Whereas if it's on the internet, YouTube videos or blogs or whatever, it's pretty recent. It is going to help you keep your finger on the pulse as to what's hot in, say, the fantasy genre nowadays, or what type of characters are going out of fashion, or what's the new software in the self-publishing industry. I follow multiple channels for writing advice, world-building tips, and publishing tips. Jenna Moreci is a self-published author whose channel is structured very similar to this one, actually. I've probably absorbed a lot of her through osmosis. She gives writing advice videos on like, here are some tips to improve your writing, here are some things to avoid when writing, here are some tips on marketing your book, etc. Hello Future Me has an entire playlist dedicated to world building that I am constantly watching and rewatching to help figure out my own worlds. iWriterly is a channel created by a former literary agent, so she gives you the details from that point of view, which is extraordinarily valuable. Overly Sarcastic Productions has a playlist called Trope Talks. This is really good for if you have, say, an evil empire, or you're writing a damsel in distress, or a plot twist, or any of the other tropes that they cover, as they talk about how it's been done well and how it's been done poorly. Terrible Writing Advice is a channel that's more for comedy, but there are some gems in there that will at least get your creative juices flowing. And finally, Murphy Napier has a Dear Authors playlist where she goes into her community tab, asks her community, the readers, what they would want authors to do on a specific subject. Beginnings, villains, emotions was the last one as of today. And then she compiles all the most popular answers and does a video about it. Finally, number 5, join writing groups. I personally prefer writing groups in real life when there's not a raging pandemic going around, but also, online communities, Facebook groups, it's all good. Basically, you want to find people to share your writing with and get feedback on. Every manuscript needs another pair of eyes, or 10 or 20. Authors are particularly good at spotting writing mistakes and telling you how to fix them. And that happens before the manuscript even hits the editor's desk. Also, giving feedback on other people's stories helps improve your writing because you learn to develop a critical editor's eye, and you can turn that onto your own work, thus improving your writing. I have become a much better writer since I started this YouTube channel because I'm I'm talking to everyone about the writing and world building process. I'm doing all this research on the subjects and being asked writing questions by you guys that has made me look at my own work with that same critical lens. And I am eternally grateful to you guys for helping me out with that. Tell us how you've improved your writing craft in the comments, and be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you want bonus content, be sure to check out the link to my Patreon page in the description. Bye, lovelies!